Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
A warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Rob Donaldson. He does great work over on youtube.com/Rob Donaldson with the Rob's Best Bets show. Every single time he joins me, this man lends such amazing insights. He does a great job with taking a look at a lot of these mid-major teams as well, so we're going to be talking a lot about that today. Sometimes we just never know where our chats are going to be going with Rob. Sometimes we're talking about great guard plays. Sometimes we're talking about forwards, and that's the fun of having Rob aboard. He's able to riff upon just about everything. He has so many great angles that he's taking a look at for the upcoming season, so we're going to dive in on those and so much more, focusing a little bit more on those mid-major teams, and that's a lot of what we're doing right now this time of year in college basketball, getting set for what is going to be an incredible 2025-26 season now that the dust has settled in terms of the transfer portal and all of the 100 million billion moves out there. And got a conference preview on the podcast yesterday, probably going to get another one within the next few days. We're working on the NEC podcast, getting everything pinned down there, so we've got a lot of fun on that front, and we're going to try to get the Patriot League done within the next few days as well. So that's a lot of what you can look forward to on this podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. That 100% of gambling transactions are always going to be approved. When you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, Greg. That is going to get you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with our good friend Rob Donaldson, who he's doing a great job this time of year. If you're looking more for live bets at the baseball front as well, you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB. And Rob, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, we're sitting here, it's late August, and that means we're only a couple months really away from the start of the college basketball season, man. It's been a long time, but also at the same time, I feel like we're kind of blazing through the off season here.
Yeah, we certainly are. And I just recently did my Ohio Valley Conference preview, and I know you've mentioned a few Ohio Valley Conference teams on the podcast here in the last few months. I know that Southern Indiana is a team that you've taken a look at last few years. And how have you just taken a look at this conference, and what are some of the things that you look at in a conference where you've got so many different styles, and any team that's able to knock down threes, in my opinion, becomes very dangerous in this conference?
And when you're kind of looking at these like sort of lower mid-major level conferences, it's still Division One hoops, and you're still going to have a lot of competency in terms of, established programs versus, programs who have never really risen to that level. But at the same time, it's not as established as, say, Duke in the ACC, right? Or Purdue in the Big Ten. You're going to have a lot of room for variance because nobody has a pure stranglehold on the OVC or just these types of conferences in this tier. And, Morehead State is one of those teams that over the past few years, or past decade rather, we've kind of seen have that sort of stranglehold. But at the same time, it's kind of opened up. There's a lot of really good teams in that mix now. And from that standpoint, what I would say is don't be afraid to kind of buy into a team that maybe hasn't had that sort of brand in these leagues because, hey, last year we saw SIUE, we saw SEMO, we saw Tennessee State make a push late, and there were a number of really good teams that just kind of came out of seemingly nowhere just because of the transfer portal talent that they ended up bringing in.
Yep, and how much do you want to take a look at this time of year? I always like to call this teams with guys that are out of sight, out of mind, because I bring up the OVC and they had their top scorer from 2 seasons ago, KK Robinson, who was giving them like 15 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists per game. He missed all of last season due to an injury. Him coming back this year, I think is one of the biggest adds of the offseason, and it's not even going out there in the transfer portal or anything like that. It's just getting back a guy that you thought that you were going to have the previous year.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the dynamic at play that really helped Little Rock really compete at the highest level of this league last season because, they did bring in transfer portal talent. And I do think when you are looking at the best teams from these types of conferences, transfer portal talent, the newcomers coming in, very important. But, to your point, there's a lot of guys who are going to be developing within these programs because, these are the down transfer type of programs that really only inherit that level. And, if they can't go up because of, say, an injury or just because they didn't get the appropriate amount of shine, in a previous year at one of these schools, they're going to stay at Pat and try to make something work because what's, change to just change in this type of, landscape of college basketball. Players are changing their venues because the opportunity is greater somewhere else. Well, hey, what if that opportunity isn't greater somewhere else? They kind of pile up in these types of leagues, and absolutely, you got to be on the lookout for those guys who are staying with their program for whatever reason.
And I think that you bring up something so interesting as well, because you'd mentioned opportunity, as Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the Rob's Best Bets show, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Soups. And I think that that's a big reason why I feel like freshmen in this year and in this day and age are going to be playing such a big role in terms of these mid-majors, because I've just noticed that more of these top 250, top 300 guys, they went to mid-majors this year than in the past. They are not going to be able to swipe like the top 25, top 30 guys, because those guys will be getting solid playing time elsewhere. But how do you take a look at that dynamic with these freshmen getting sold on being able to get playing time and then being able to get, for lack of a better term, a larger bag at a larger school? Because I do think that that's something that can help out these mid-majors. While they might not be able to offer the dollars of other schools, they can offer playing time right away, which can lead to dollars.
Absolutely. And when you are looking at, say, the best players on, a lot of these mid-major programs that we've seen, whether it's in the ASUN, the OVC, or, the Missouri Valley Conference, there are constantly players who are down transfers who never got really an opportunity to shine at a previous, high major institution. And, from your standpoint, now I think people are starting to rework their brain when it comes to college basketball in the sense of, hey, I've got 5 years to not only, carve out a career for myself within the sport, but to legitimately go out there and make money. And from day one, do I want to be just sitting on the bench getting 0 minutes per game? In year 2, maybe get 10 minutes per game and then have an opportunity in year 3 to finally break out and show my talent? Or do I want to show my talent from day 1 and then in year 2 get that immediate boost just because I have kind of that resume and actual playing time behind my belt? I think that reworking of the brain is ultimately what a lot of these players are doing, because they're seeing what's happening with the Danny Wolfs of the world and the Vlad Goldens and all these types of players who went that mid-major route and then all of a sudden got, a nice little payday to join a high major team. And I don't think that's just kind of a one-stop shop and a little blip on the radar. I legitimately think that's how basketball is being reworked. And, personally, I'm all here for it.
Yep, and how it's being reworked as well as some of these guys that maybe they did join that power conference at the beginning. They decide, hey, you know what, I might not be getting a ton of playing time, but we're going to insert your favorite power conference here. They don't get a lot of playing time those first 2 years, and then they go down a level. I think that those are some of the most interesting guys to be able to look at as well, because some of these guys that go down a level, they absolutely tear it up. Like you look at a Yohan Traore, for example. We remember he didn't get a lot of minutes at Auburn, goes down to UC Santa Barbara, and now he's back up at the power conference level. He was last year with SMU as well. And then some of these guys are just flat out busts that never go anywhere whatsoever. I still remember there was some guy that began his career at Arizona State and he ended his career at the NAIA level. That was not great, to say the least. But how do you take a look at those guys? Because I think that they could be some of the more difficult reads, because sometimes these high school recruiters just flat out whiff on a guy.
100%. And when you're looking at those types of, players, I think one of the more, interesting or kind of funny examples of this is a guy named Jamarcus Lawrence, who started his career at Nebraska. And, he was kind of getting a little bit of reasonable run, 20 to kind of in that 15 to 20 minute per game mark, 2 years into his tenure at Nebraska, coming out of high school. And he decides, you know what, I'm transferring to Rhode Island. I want a starting role. I want to really showcase my abilities. And guess where now he's back at this upcoming season? Nebraska. So it's just one of those things where I don't think it's a good, healthy way to kind of view like mid-major hoops as a AAA equivalent of the college basketball world for these high major conferences. But sometimes if a player needs some shine, if they need their development, if they just need to get some playing belt, like minutes under their belt, that can absolutely be the trajectory of some of these players. And the crazy example of, a Jamarcus Lawrence, for example, you're starting your career at one school, you're ending it at the same school, but you have kind of a detour in between.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because they're called boomerang transfers, and we've seen quite a few of them. Yes. Like Tanner Holden, when he was over at Wright State for a few years, he goes to Ohio State, and then he goes back to Wright State. That's a really interesting example. B.G. Johnson, such a famous guy for this, because he went back to the same school twice. He began his career at Ohio State, went to South Carolina, went back to Ohio State, now he's back at South Carolina. And these are some of the most interesting transfers in all of college basketball. So I do want to get Rob's thoughts on this on the flip side. Additionally, I want to talk with him about some of the mid-major teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish on. And I'm sure that this will lead to some Missouri Valley talk as well. That's coming up on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay, no insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Rob Donaldson. He does such great work with the show /podcast Rob's Best Bets. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at RobDFB. And Rob, we left off by talking about these boomerang transfers. I talked about it with a guy like Amici Johnson, who he spent 2 years over at Ohio State. He then spent a few years over at South Carolina. He was back at Ohio State last year. Now he's back at South Carolina, and I feel like these are some of the most interesting players in all of college basketball. Some of them have experienced great success, but I've noticed with a lot of guys, sometimes that second time around at the previous stop, when they go back to a school for a second time, it's just not as fruitful, and they're just not as productive as they were the first time around. I want to get your thoughts on these guys, because I do think that sometimes looking at these guys, that they are, for lack of a better term, once again, boomerang transfers, that second time that they're with their previous school, it just doesn't produce the same results as it did the first time around.
Yeah, and when you're looking at those types of players, Michi Johnson, maybe he's living two separate lives and we just don't even know it, but
he's got a body double.
Right, yeah. He's got a whole different family outside of, Columbus, Ohio, and outside of South Carolina. But when you're talking about just kind of that dynamic of, okay, almost like these journeyman type players within college basketball, which is crazy to say journeyman as if they are a quarterback that's, played backup for 11 different teams over the sake of his career. But we're kind of approaching that territory with a lot of these guys where, yeah, they are kind of bouncing within 5 teams within 5 years, or, 6 teams within 6 years on occasion with some of these dudes. And from that standpoint, I think you have to kind of look at that player in particular and kind of almost determine, what his mold actually is. Is he the bucket getter for this team, where maybe that kind of dynamic of going in and out is going to be really detrimental because, hey, there might have been some players that really emerged in that player's absence? Or is he more like, hey, I'm going to go out here, play defense, get rebounds, I'm going to serve a specific role, and I know my role really well? I think those players adapt a lot better than the previous. And from that standpoint, on a guy like Amici Johnson, I would be a little bit more pessimistic because I don't know exactly, what his demeanor would be coming back to the program after experiencing a success everywhere else. It's almost like, hey, I want the rock. Why aren't you giving it to me? Well, you haven't earned it. And then it could potentially create some friction. I don't really know how to view those types of players. And I kind of err on the side of potentially it just being detrimental.
Yep, absolutely. And it's just so interesting with Michi Johnson because he played 10 games last season, so this will be season number 6 for him. How he has eligibility, I have absolutely no idea. But hey, good, clean family fun there. As we've got Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show /podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I know that we've talked a lot about some of these mid-major schools, some of these mid-major conferences, but just in general, as you've been doing your research over the last few weeks, have there been a few that have been jumping out at you that maybe you didn't think about a lot towards the beginning part of the offseason, but now you're starting to take a look and you're thinking, man, maybe this school, maybe this conference as a whole might be a little bit better than what I was thinking at the front half of the offseason?
I think there's a lot of different schools that I'm really wanting to kind of see what the dynamic looks like once they actually take the floor. And, one of the schools in particular that I think year over year has proven itself to be just a mainstay when it comes to being a contender in conference and a contender for an NCAA tournament berth is, UC Irvine. And now, coming off of that NIT sort of a run of sorts where they actually almost, pulled it off, I feel like they are at a pretty good building block for their program to all of a sudden ramp it up. Even after they're going to have a lot of roster turnover this upcoming season, they are a team that I almost kind of want to buy into, hey, roster turnover, a different look. This might actually be an elevating point. And, UC Irvine, the scope of the Big West, I do feel like it's relatively open, especially with some of these coaches kind of getting picked off by other high major conferences, and UC Irvine kind of standing pat almost makes me want to really buy into them again, and this is maybe 3 years in a row now where they've been kind of that darling mid-major, but I feel like right now with so much roster turnover, they're flying a little bit under the radar, almost to like a undeserved extent.
Yep, and how much do you just value that camaraderie as well? Because I'm right there with you on UC Irvine. You just know what you're going to be able to get out of them, and it feels like these teams where you know what you're going to be able to get out of them, they stay very consistent. They're becoming so few and far between in all of college basketball, right, which I think makes UC Irvine such a valuable team in so many different aspects.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing too, is because, to your point, it feels like we're operating in these 1 year and 2 year windows with almost every single team. And so when you do have a Furman that, yeah, maybe that style isn't going to be conducive to ever really, making a true run. Maybe they'll have that one upset win over a Virginia type of team in the NCAA tournament, but maybe they're not conducive for the long-term success of a run in the NCAA tournament. We all know that they're going to at least be in the mix when it comes down to, March and that conference tournament run of things. And, I would say UC Irvine is right there with them. I would say a team like a Northern Iowa is always going to be there in the Missouri Valley Conference, North Texas in the American. And when you do have those types of schools, it's almost like don't take it for granted, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen with a school like a High Point that came onto the scene a couple seasons ago, had a really great run of things for 2 straight years, and is now going to be seeing a totally different, regime change with Alan Huss going out the window and them losing their entire roster. Like the High Point era of the Big South might just be done, but there are certain programs that we just know are constantly going to be there. And, Yale out of the Ivy is another great example. And I feel like with those types of schools, kind of look in that pocket and potentially just say, hey, which one of those schools entices me the most? Latch onto them, and it might pay dividends just come from like a betting front game to game.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that it's so interesting to be able to take a look at these teams that they do have the consistency. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Northern Iowa out there in the Missouri Valley Conference, because that's a team that has always had an identity, being slow, being controlled, playing good defense. And it felt like they got away from that with Bowling Born for a few years. And I feel like just rediscovering that over the last few years has been big for them. And it's a Missouri Valley Conference that in general, I think it's going to be a really good top to bottom conference this season.
Yeah, and I love Northern Iowa, and I've got a soft spot in my heart for Ben Jacobson as well. But when you are looking at that makeup of the roster and losing a guy like Titan Anderson, who had been like a main staple of consistency and composure for that team over the last, say, 2-3 years at this point, which is, again, a kind of a rarity in college basketball. Well, now they're returning a bunch of dudes who gave them quality minutes last season, including a guy in Leon Bond who got hurt very, very early on. He was a down transfer from Texas A&M, I believe, a couple seasons ago, and he was off to a red-hot start. So when you are looking at, say, Northern Iowa and the scope of the Missouri Valley Conference, I think they're going to be right there at play again. Drake is one of those schools that they can turn over their head coaching regime, they can turn over their entire roster, and they can all of a sudden just still be there at the end of things. But eventually, I do feel like all that coaching turnover for Drake is going to pave the way for another school to fit in. And whether that's Northern Iowa, whether that's Bradley, whether that's a team like an Illinois State that I'm pretty bullish on, I do think that the Missouri Valley Conference is more open than a lot of the years in the past here.
Yep, it certainly is, and it's going to be a lot of fun to take a look at that conference this year. We've got ourselves a lot in college basketball in general to be able to break down, to decipher, and Rob, you're doing such a great job of getting set for what is going to be a tremendous college basketball season. It's not easy work taking a look at all 364 Division I schools. I know all too well about that, and you do as well. You do such an amazing job of being able to get set for the upcoming season in terms of your baseball work as well, which you do much like myself while the college basketball season is in hiatus. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, as we're kind of paving through all these different seasons, Major League Baseball is going, deeper into the season. We're just starting college football. And when college football starts off, that means college basketball is right on the horizon as well. And I'm so excited to talk about the specific games with you once those come to be. But for those who want to follow my bets in this sport, you can do so on my Twitter account at RobDFB and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
Absolutely. Rob is one of the best in the business. He does such a great job all 12 months out of the year taking a look at this great game of college basketball. And every single time he joins me, he makes us all so much smarter. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind the letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. We're up to over 2,100 days without a missed podcast, so you can bank on one thing, me being with you guys once again tomorrow. So I appreciate you guys listening in today, and I'll be back with you with a fresh episode in the AM. Thank you so much.